My friends, it is time to learn about hormones. Yes, that's real. We're talking about the endocrine system and hormones. All right, giddy up. So, first of all, why in the world do we need hormones? We're going to use them to regulate things. So, we're going to use them to send messages. We're going to use them in cell communication. We talked about this in AP biology, and I think all but one of you are in that class. We're going to regulate different levels of things like calcium and sodium and potassium, uh, iodine, things like that. We're going to use them to help regulate our metabolism. Our thyroid is a big part of our metabolic process. Our growth is human growth hormone. We've got a lot of things that control how fast or how slowly we grow, how we develop, maturity, right? Big hormone surge right there. So we use hormones for a lot of things. And also, last but not least, here on this little list, we've got reproduction. All right. So next up, we've got ways to regulate the body. And we talked a lot about that in cell communication. We use both the nervous system and the endocrine system to do this. The endocrine system, that's kind of like the messengers for the nervous system. And the endocrine system has ductless glands. What does that mean? It means that they don't have little tubes or little ducts coming out of the glands themselves. They release their chemical, their hormone, right into the bloodstream, right? So you've got little capillaries that surround each of the glands, and then the glands just release those hormones, and then they're going right into the bloodstream. We also have electrical transmission from the neurotransmitters. Remember, that's the intermediary between the electrical impulses and different parts of the body. We can use hormones to help speed that up and regulate that process. So here's my endocrine gland right here. Boop, 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 boop. It's going to dump the hormones that it's making. Here's the gland material, and then here's the little capillary. It dumps those chemicals right into the bloodstream itself. Some of those hormones will go to a target cell. That cell will do something, and receptor proteins will pick up another message and send it along directly to a nerve. So some hormones cause messages to be sent to other parts of the body. So, for example, our testes and our ovaries are sending messages to lots of different parts of the body. So when we release estrogen, it isn't just going to certain parts of the body as women. It's going to different parts of the body to have different things happen. So it can react all over. Estrogen can travel to breast tissue and cause breast development during puberty. Estrogen can go to the uterus and cause it to shed the lining during the monthly cycle. Estrogen can go to the brain and have certain things happen. So regulation by chemicals, we already know that from cell signaling, that chemicals are used in all cell signaling processes, little tiny molecules with certain shapes. So hormones are just those things. They are little tiny chemicals with what kind of classes do we have? Protein and steroid, lipid-based hormones. So our group here, let me move my little face out of the way. We have insulin. We've talked about that before. That's the thing that's released by our pancreas, and that's going to regulate our blood sugar levels. Antidiuretic hormone, that's what ADH stands for. That helps to regulate our water levels in our body. So our body can either retain fluid for using it in different purposes, or it can release that fluid into the bloodstream. And so ADH controls that. We also have proteins that cause certain things to happen in puberty and in monthly cycles in women. So FSH stands for follicle stimulating hormone. LH stands for luteinizing hormone. And these are both coming into play in a big way in helping with reproduction, because that is the monthly cycle. Things are regulating the release of eggs in the monthly cycles of women. We've talked before about adrenaline, epinephrine, norepinephrine, and those kind of things. We've called them, I think, just chemicals before, but they're actually hormones. Melatonin is a hormone. Remember where melatonin is created? Hmm. That's just the last chapter, so you should probably remember that, our last unit. And then we've got our steroids. We've got estrogen, progesterone. I think I said that already. Testosterone, aldosterone, and these are all lipid based. So lipid means fat. So they have a different way of getting into the cells because of that chemical structure. How do they act on the target cells? Depends on whether that cell, let me get to the bottom here, there we go. It depends on whether that cell can let it into its membrane or not. So lipid-based hormones are hydrophobic. That means that they don't like water, right? So they're going to go and pass directly through the membrane. Small hydrophobic molecules can get through because of the fatty layer we've got in our cell membranes. They can go directly into the nucleus of the cell and act as a transcription factor, meaning we need to make a certain protein, so we're going to turn a gene on. Protein-based hormones are hydrophilic. That means that they like water. They're not lipid soluble. They can't go directly through the cell membrane. They have to have this cascade of cell communication happening. So yeah, if we're going to see this whole process happening again with a protein-based hormone, they have to attach to a receptor protein. They're going to initiate some kind of, it could be a G protein pathway. It could be any number of different things that we've studied in the past, but they're going to be some kind of reception mediated protein and then cascade of signals that go into the cell. And a lot of them are going to use the secondary messenger. We talked about that before, and we'll review that again in just a second. So here is, let's say, estrogen, steroid, right? We've got it coming into the blood. And the first thing it is going to do, because it is a lipid base, it's going to be able to pass right through this hydrophobic tail section of the cell membrane, and it's going to bind to that receptor protein on the inside of the cell. So some of these molecules are going to have to bind to a receptor protein on the outside because they're hydrophilic and they can't go right through the membrane. Steroids, because they're hydrophobic, can go right through the membrane, binds to the receptor protein, and then it can be carried into, here's my nuclear membrane, it can be carried into the nucleus inside. So it's going to tell the DNA, ooh, it's time to make that protein, or time to code for that protein to be made, right? It's not going to make the protein, but it's going to code for that protein. We need the copy of that gene, that A's, T's, C's, and G's that says make this particular protein. So this presence inside of the nucleus causes this particular gene, let's say it's the gene for making, I don't know, whatever, any number of proteins. And now that messenger RNA has made a copy based on this triggering signal right here. That messenger RNA is processed, leaves the nuclear membrane, binds to the ribosome, the protein is made, and then the protein can either be used inside the cell or it can leave the cell. So that's one of the ways that steroids can act. And there we go. So what kind of proteins can we make? We can make growth factor. We can make proteins for making bone or hair. We can make all kinds of proteins. We can make gametes, proteins to make gametes. We can make egg or sperm cells based on these steroid hormones. There's lots of things that we can make. Lots of different proteins that we can make that are going to tell the body to do different things, tell the cell to do different things. So now we've got protein hormones. Remember protein hormones, we just said this about 2 minutes ago, 2.5 minutes ago to be specific, that they cannot go directly through the membrane. They can't just diffuse to the membrane like hydrophobic molecules can, like our steroids can, because they're hydrophilic. So they have to attach to this receptor protein. And those of you in AP Bio, you're like, what up? That looks just like a G protein pathway. You are so right, my friends. You are so smart, because that's exactly what it is. So we've got this right here. And remember that L word that we call this little protein hormone? Ligand. Yes, you're right. So it binds to this receptor protein right here that's in the membrane because it itself cannot go through the membrane. That's going to cause, maybe in this circumstance right here, this is a G protein that moves over here. Oh my gosh, what? Adenylyl cyclase is this little guy right here. That's going to cause ATP to become C-AMP. What? Secondary messenger. Oh my gosh, this is starting to come back, Mrs. Willards. Yes, yes, yes. All right, CAMP is our secondary messenger. And we're going to activate some particular enzyme. And then the enzyme is going to make something happen. We're going to have some kind of response. And that's what we looked at for cell communication for AP Bio. As we said, what is that? What is that? So some of you chose this as your example. You chose epinephrine, which is also called adrenaline. Epinephrine is a hydrophilic or protein-based hormone, and so it binds to this receptor protein in a G protein pathway. Here's our G protein right here. Woo-hoo-hoo. We're using GTP to take, remember, alpha, beta, gamma subunits. What? The alpha and the beta and the gamma subunits are going to move or not move. Do you remember? And that's going to cause one of these subunits to come over here. This is the G protein right here, and it's going to bind to adenyl cyclase. There we go, which causes ATP to become cyclic or CAMP, cyclic AMP. And that's going to activate these protein kinases. And that's going to, in this case, adrenaline. Remember, we want to have lots of sugar released or glucose released into the bloodstream. And in our liver cells, this is where this is taking place right here. The adrenal gland on top of the kidney is what produces adrenaline or epinephrine. But in the liver cell, glycogen is that temporary form of glucose that we have. We want to break down that glycogen that happens to be present in the liver. That's extra glucose from maybe we ate a Snickers bar yesterday or whenever. And that glycogen is broken down. It releases then those glucose molecules, and we're going to use glucose to make ATP. Now, if I was lecturing in front of your face right now, I could ask you that question to see if you remember that. But that's what we need glucose for. We need glucose to make ATP. So that's the response that we're looking for there. So why do we have the secondary messenger? Why do we have CAMP? Because it amplifies the message. It makes a huge transduction pathway here. And so one little ligand right here, one little molecule, one hormone molecule can create a huge amount of product down here at the bottom and create an even bigger cellular response. Or we studied this in AP Bio. I keep saying that a lot, but it's true. We did a lot in AP Bio this year. So we're going to amplify the original message. We're going to have a huge cascade effect using this CAMP as our secondary messenger. It's intermediary. And so we get a faster response. We get more glucose dumped into the bloodstream just from a couple of molecules of epinephrine or adrenaline. So what else are hormones used for? We can use them to maintain homeostasis in the body. That means we want to keep things even or regulated inside the body. So let's say, for example, we've got this negative feedback model, which means if I have too much of something in my body, I'm producing too much of something, maybe it's temperature, maybe my body is hot, maybe I've really exercised and it's 101 degrees outside, so I am really, really hot. So then I've got glands that will step in, release hormones, which is going to lower some function in the body. And we're going to watch what that happens in just a second. The same thing if we have a low temperature or a low concentration of something, then the glands are going to release a different hormone that does something to almost counteract that, to have an opposite effect. It's going to raise a body condition, like raise the body temperature for too cold. It's going to lower the body temperature for too hot and raise it if we're too cold. Both are regulated by hormones in glands. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So let's say that we want to control body temperature. It's too high, right? We're exercising. It's 101 degrees outside. We're not drinking enough water. We're not going out into the shade and cooling down at all. The hypothalamus, remember the hypothalamus and their parts of the brain, good for you. It's right there by the pituitary gland. So right above it, here's my pituitary gland. Here's my hypothalamus. It's just a part of the brain. It's not an actual structure, so to speak, that has delineations in it. So the hypothalamus is going to make nerve signals to go to blood vessels in the surface areas of our body. So the skin has lots of capillaries, and we know this because when we get really hot, our faces get red, our chests get red, our arms, our legs get red. Why do they get red? Because The nerve signals are telling these blood vessels, oh, dilate. We need to get the blood as close to the surface of the skin as possible. We have some evaporative cooling that's going to take place there from the sweat glands. Sweat glands are going to produce sweat. The wind, the breeze is going to evaporate that sweat. And in doing so, it's going to cool the surface temperature of the skin. So if we can get as much blood as possible to that surface, to our cheeks, to our chest, to our backs, to our arms, the surface areas, we can actually cool our blood. So that's the purpose of sweating. How about the other part happens? Now we're outside. Now it's 20 below. We haven't worn a coat because we really aren't that smart. It's a polar vortex, right? And our hypothalamus now releases another signal, a different signal to the nerves that say, now we're going to constrict our blood vessels because we want to conserve that body heat. And that's why our faces get kind of really pale in the cold, cold weather, because our blood vessels constrict. We're keeping our core body temperature as warm as possible. And then we do the shivering thing. And when we shiver, we're generating body heat. Those are all controlled by the nervous system. How about blood sugar? Holy sheep dip, we just ate a Snicker bar, right? So if we have a high blood sugar because we had a bunch of sucrose, which turns into glucose in our blood system, our pancreas is going to produce insulin. Remember, insulin is the thing that helps that sugar get into our cells. Without insulin, sugar can't get into our cells, and it does no purpose whatsoever. The mitochondria can't get at it, break it down into ATP, right? So when we have that high blood sugar, our liver is going to be stimulated to take that excess glucose, store it in the form of glycogen, which we can use as kind of like that reserve. If it's not used up fairly quickly, within several hours, it's turned into fat. What this does, nervous system wise, is it also reduces our appetite. When we've eaten a Snicker bar, we shouldn't really be hungry. And sometimes we confuse I want something with I'm hungry. Usually our desires for sugar, which is kind of an addictive substance, it really is. They've studied the brain and sugar is quite addictive. So our body says, our brain says, oh, I want some more of that sweet stuff. I love it. But our appetite center, the part that says, are you actually hungry, shuts down. We just have kind of taken to ignoring the appetite signal and just going for the, oh, I want that because it tastes good and I want it. What if we have low blood sugar? We're fasting. We haven't eaten for an entire day for whatever reason. Our pancreas now is going to slow down production of insulin, and it's going to also produce in our pancreas down here what's called glucagon. Instead of the beta cells, which are making insulin right up here, we're going to use the alpha cells in our pancreas. That's going to produce glucagon, and glucagon is that thing that releases the glucose from the liver by breaking down the glycogen. And it triggers hunger. All right, how about the saltiness of our blood? You never thought about that, right? What if we eat a lot of salty foods, a lot of peanuts, a lot of chips or whatever? We're going to actually have a really high salt content in our blood. It's going to activate the hypothalamus again and the pituitary gland to release a hormone called antidiuretic hormone. And what that causes the body to do is any liquids that we have, any liquids that we consume, we're going to maintain those. Any liquids that we can draw from our tissues, we're going to pull those out to try and regulate that level of salt in the blood. We don't want our blood to be too salty. We don't want it to be too watery because we have to use our blood to carry all the nutrients, all of our oxygen, get rid of our CO2, get rid of our wastes. So we really have to control the osmolarity or the saltiness of our blood. And that works with our kidneys to reabsorb the water. We're not going to urinate as much if we eat a salty food. So you can probably test that out yourselves. Eat a bag of chips and see how many times you use the bathroom. Not too often. Why? Because your body knows it has to conserve that water because that's what it needs to do to survive. So it makes you thirsty. You're going to want to drink more because you've eaten that bag of salty chips. What if it's the opposite? What if you decide, I'm going to drink 2 gallons of pure water and your blood osmolarity becomes low? Then the kidney, the nephron, which is the active part of the kidney, we'll talk more about that later when we get to the excretory system. Inside the nephron, we're going to release renin, sorry. Yep, there we go. And angiotensin, and those things, there we go, are going to cause our adrenal gland to release aldosterone. Aldosterone is going to help us to increase our salt reabsorption and get rid of our water. And then we're going to be using the bathroom more. Right? So interestingly enough, that makes sense. We know that this happens. We can see it happening in our lives. But here's why this is happening. It's a feedback model. If you can remember just a couple of things, know these particular parts of the nervous system. The hypothalamus is this part of the brain. So here's our little pituitary gland. Our hypothalamus is right above it here. This is the master nerve control center. We talked about that when we did the nervous system. Remember that just recently. So it's going to regulate pretty much everything all around the body, and especially the homeostatic things. It's going to release a lot of hormones. And then this pituitary gland, remember that thing that sits in the sella turcica of the skull? That is our master gland. And it releases, again, another whole cascade of different hormones that do different things. The pituitary gland, for how small it is, actually has a lot of things that it can produce, and it has different parts to it. There's an anterior pituitary, posterior pituitary gland, and we'll talk about more of those in just a second. So, all the things the pituitary gland. These are all hormones. So TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, your thyroid has a lot to do with your metabolism, how quickly you are able to burn through your fuel sources. Growth hormone, ADH, prolactin. We're going to talk more about prolactin here in a little bit. This is for ovulation. Oxytocin helps contract the uterus. Prolactin is an interesting hormone because it acts differently. Same hormone structurally, it acts differently in different organisms. Check this out. So in mammals, in us, right, and also pigs, prolactin is a hormone that stimulates the mammary glands to produce milk. Well, birds, they don't have mammary glands, at least not the last time I checked. And so in birds, it helps to metabolize their fat stores. Same hormone, same structure, different organism. In fish, because they don't also have the need to feed their young, and they don't need to metabolize that in the same way, they do it differently. It's going to help them regulate their osmolarity. And in amphibians, this little guy right here, it helps him lose his little tail to go from a tadpole to a frog. Interesting, right? Same hormone, different effects. So possibly an ancient hormone, because it's used in so many different organisms, means it was probably around before lots of different other hormones, maybe. All right, so how do we regulate our metabolism? You might have heard of people who have thyroid issues, like a sluggish thyroid, or maybe their thyroid doesn't even work so well anymore. And what does it do? Our thyroid helps with metabolism in the following ways. It can help us use the energy that we've got. It can help us speed up or slow down our heart rate. It can increase or decrease our blood pressure, helps us with muscle tone, which is interesting, how quickly we tend to build muscle when we exercise, helps us to digest more quickly, helps us in all kinds of different ways. So I'm trying not to go into too much detail and overwhelm you guys in these short little videos. So just remember that this one right here, the hypothalamus, remember, it releases something that tells the pituitary gland to release something. So this TSH is actually what doctors are going to look for in your blood if they think you have a thyroid issue. If you have low thyroid, TSH levels is one of the things that they're looking for another couple of different other hormones too, but this is the main one, your levels here. And if your thyroid levels are low, that typically means that you are tired. It means that you are not losing weight like you want to if you're overweight. It means that you're gaining weight. It means that you just have a host of metabolic issues. So a thyroid really regulates that. So what are some problems that can happen with our thyroid? One of them is goiter, this thing right here. Wow. And we solved this in the United States and in other countries in a very simple way by adding iodine to salt. Why salt? Why in the heck will we add iodine? Because iodine helps prevent this, which is called goiter. It's an enlargement of the thyroid because it can't, this thyroid can't produce what are called thyroxins without the presence of iodine in the blood. So why in the heck would we add iodine to salt? Because we salt everything, right? Everything is super salty here in our developed country. And so by adding iodine to salt, it was the government's way of ensuring that everybody would get the iodine that they need. Because otherwise, you don't find iodine in too many places. If you're eating seafood, you're going to get some iodine. But other than that, it doesn't occur naturally in diets here in the United States. And so we added it to our salt. Kind of an interesting reason why we have iodized salt. All right, blood calcium level is another feedback model that we're going to take a look at. If we have high calcium level, which is a good thing is if we're forming bones, especially for pregnant women. Think about that. A pregnant woman has to form an entire person in her body, right? So she's got to form bones. So she needs extra calcium in her bloodstream. Her kidneys are going to reabsorb that, and they're going to deposit that in bones. Sorry about that. And then what if our blood calcium level is low? So we don't have a lot of calcium. And that happens in pregnant women also because as they're forming bones, their blood calcium level is going to drop. Remember, we use calcium for a couple of different things in our bodies, just besides the bone formation. We're using that for muscle contraction. We're using that for nerve impulses. Remember the sodium potassium pump, and we've got different ions with different positive and negative charges to them. We want to be able to regulate our blood calcium level since we use it for so many different things. And we can do that using our kidneys and our thyroid. And then these little pink guys right here are our parathyroid glands. So they're little tiny, they're about the size of grains of rice sitting on the back of our thyroid gland right there. And they're going to regulate our blood calcium level. Moving on, reproductive cycle. I know you're so excited about this, right? Gonadotropin releasing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone. All of these things are going to cause the ovary, right there, to release estrogen. Estrogen causes the eggs that are developing right here to be released, usually one time a month, one egg per month, sometimes twice the number, sometimes even 3 eggs per month are released. They're maturing and being released from the ovary. So here's my little maturing follicle right here. This is called a follicle. And as it develops, it's going to release right here. And here are the little fimbriae around the tubes. They're going to carry that egg down to the uterus, the fallopian tubes. Progesterone is the other hormone that works in the monthly cycle of women. And what progesterone's role is to build up the lining of the uterus. Why would we want the lining of the uterus to be built up? Well, if you're a man, you don't know and you don't really care about the lining of the uterus being built up, right? But if you are a woman and you want to get pregnant, it's very important to have that nice, thick, blood-filled lining to your uterus because that's going to be the thing that supports the baby. And that's where the placenta is going to form and the umbilical cord. So we need to have the inside of the uterus nice and thick. So progesterone is very important. So sometimes when women have trouble becoming pregnant, it's because they don't make enough estrogen or they don't make enough progesterone. Either they're not releasing the eggs that are going to get moved up and fertilized here in the fallopian tube, and they're not making the progesterone that's going to thicken the walls of their uterus. They can take these hormones to help them get pregnant and maintain pregnancy, but there's actually a lot that goes on in pregnancy that we don't even think about, all regulated by hormones, which is kind of cool. Boom, boom, boom. What's HCG? That's the thing that's tested for in pregnancy kits. Human chorionic gonadotropin. gonadotropin. So what is that hormone? That's a hormone that is released by the uterus when it's making a placenta. So here's the lining of my uterine wall, and I'm growing a placenta. The placenta's job is to bring blood to the developing embryo. As soon as that placenta starts to form, this hormone is released. And what's interesting about that is this hormone stops more eggs from being released, because why would a woman or any mammal need to release more eggs when she's already pregnant, right? That process has begun. So interestingly enough, as long as the body has HCG, it's usually not going to release an egg to be fertilized. And so HCG is the pregnancy hormone, and very, very trace amounts of it can be picked up in the urine, the blood, obviously, but in the urine very early in pregnancy because the placenta is being formed. Here's your reproductive 101. So here's ovulation, the middle of the month here, and right smack dab in the middle of the cycle. It doesn't have to be on the 14th, right? Because the middle of one cycle isn't necessarily the middle of another cycle in another woman. So we've got the pituitary gland that's releasing hormones, follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. We've got the uterine lining. See how it's thickening and thickening, becoming thicker, more blood supplies coming in. Ovulation happens. That's the release of the egg right around the middle of the cycle. We're continuing to thicken the lining of that uterus. If there's no implantation, there's no reason to have a thick lining, and then it starts to shed. Interesting, interesting, interesting. Corpus luteum is what's left of the follicle after the egg is released. Estrogen is needed to get this process ramped up. Progesterone is needed to calm it back down again. Interesting, right? We don't even think about this, and this happens all of the time in women of reproductive age. It's a miracle. All right, so more to what's going on in your world. Stress. Oh my gosh, stress does so much to our body. It's releasing all kinds of different crazy hormones. We're releasing cortisol, we're releasing epinephrine, we are releasing all kinds of things. So we have some kind of stressor, right? Even if the stressor is, oh my gosh, I see a bear, right? Or oh my gosh, I see someone coughing who's walking toward me right at this moment. So we're going to release particular hormones by the hypothalamus. We're going to see that happen. And then we're going to release other hormones from the anterior pituitary gland. And they are going to, ACTH is going to be released, acetyl, all of a sudden. No big deal. You're not even paying attention right now. It's okay if I've forgotten that. So the adrenal cortex is the part of the adrenal gland that's going to make hormones. Remember, the adrenal gland is this little guy sitting on top of our kidneys. And what happens when we are stressed out? Take a look at the short term. I'll scroll down here in a second so you can see these. What happens in the short term? So we're going to, if we see a bear or see someone coughing who's walking down the street toward us, the glycogen is going to be broken down to glucose so we have energy to run or to fight. We're going to smack them in the face and say, get 6 feet away from me. We can have increased blood pressure. What does that cause? That means more blood is flooding into our muscles so we can act. We can have increased breathing rate. All these things are going to help us to fight or flight. Long-term effects, though, because this is a good thing, right? We want that to happen. But long-term effects on our poor little adrenal glands, we're going to take a look at a short video in a second. But long-term effects are our kidneys being messed up, our liver being messed up. We're having problems with metabolism, and we're not able to break down fat like we used to. We're storing fat like crazy because our body is saying, oh, you're stressed, you need extra energy. So I'm going to have you not burn through that fat at all, but we're going to have you store that energy as fat. So even more fat is going to be added onto your body, right? I think I can relate to that. Yes, I have some long-term stress effects going on in my body right now as we speak. All right. Adrenal fatigue. Let's go back here for just a hot second. But adrenal fatigue is something that's probably come about in the last 10 or 20 years to the forefront of our knowledge of what's going on in our body due to stress. And it's become a thing because we no longer have those nice 6, 7, 8 hours of peace and quiet at night. When I was a kid, the TV would go to snow at I think 12:30. It was either 12:30 or 1 in the morning. And they would play the national anthem every night in the early morning, and then it would go to snow. It was static, like no channels, no TV. Imagine that reality, like no TV at all, right? Hi, honey. There's my husband in the background. So now you don't have that. You can watch TV 24 hours a day. You can talk to people on the phone 24 hours a day. You can get on the internet 24 hours a day. But what is that doing? It's increasing the number of people with allergies. You've probably heard about so many people in your life with different allergies. That was never a thing when I was a young person. I didn't know anybody with allergies, like not one person.
My dad was the only one I knew.
No peanut allergies, no anything. We're relying more on drugs to help us regulate our bodies because our adrenal glands can't keep up. And it's affecting our diet. We're using more things to kind of counteract these effects right up here. And so our lifestyle is introducing more toxins through our diet and just our overall atmosphere. And some really negative things are happening to our bodies. Let's take a look real quickly at what adrenal fatigue is. Here we go. Let's learn a little bit.
Okay, in this video we're going to talk about the adrenal. There are other videos that will show you all the different symptoms, so I'm not going to cover that, but just I'm going to cover some important things and then what to do if you have an adrenal issue. First of all, you need to know that the adrenal gland adapts the body to all stress states. It prepares the body and it adapts it for a stress state. The problem is all stress accumulates in the body, even from birth. So it's stuck there. And what we have to do is we have to extract all the body stress because it's still there. Even the injury on your head when you were 10, all that stuff is still there. It's almost as if your adrenals are reacting now, in present time, to old stuff. You have too many applications on your desktop computer that are running in the past that sucks energy from the adrenal in present time, making the adrenal not function correctly. The adrenal gland is unique and it has an outside and an inside. The outside is gland, the inside is all nerve tissue. So the nerves, it's called the flight or fight, like adrenaline type things. I'm not going to give you a lot on that right now, but the point is you need to know that this is where the hub of stress occurs. It's right on top of the kidney. You have the pituitary that controls on a feedback circuit back and forth. There are 2 acupressure techniques that you're going to learn, but you're going to need help on one of them because there's something advanced I'm going to show you that will really help chill out those adrenals, and I'll explain exactly how to do it. Now, what you have to do is there's several key things that we recommend in addition to the acupressure. The acupressure extracts the stress, but there's some nutritional things. B1, vitamin B1. The more stress you experience, the more vitamin B1 you deplete. The best source of B1 is in nutritional yeast. You can get it from the health food store. Try to find the one that is non-fortified, okay? And this will really help counter nervous tension and stress in your body. The way you know you're deficient in B1 is you have this lot of built-up stress and you just want to explode. But my adrenal day formula has natural B1 in it because it's hard to find. So the adrenal day, when people take it, they just feel really calm. That's because of one of the things it has, which is B1. Okay. Now the other thing is potassium. Now even if you have a blood test, it's not going to show up because 98% of all your potassium is inside the cell, not in your blood. So your cells have to be severely depleted before it even shows up on a blood test. But potassium, the main function of potassium is to help support the nervous system. And when you don't have enough potassium, your anxiety, you have stress, you have nerve issues, it affects the heart. It's an electrolyte. It's very important into calming the body and helping things like restless leg syndrome. And so the way you get that is from the big salads. You ever see those big plastic things of salad that are like these squares? So that's probably about 8 ounces. That's how much salad you need. That's 8 cups per day. 1 ounce per cup. So you need to start having more salads or vegetables to get the potassium in your body. A banana is 300 milligrams. You need 4,700. So forget the fruit. Okay, so adrenal fatigue formula. That's we have a product that's called adrenal fatigue formula. The new name is called adrenal night formula. It's the same formula. So you can take one before bed. That has certain nutrients to put you in a relaxed state so you can actually go to sleep at night. So we recommend that. And then adrenal day during the day because it has the natural bees to actually extract and a lot of other things too to help extract stress. As far as the exercise goes, we recommend low intensity things. You can do yoga, but walking is the best. Get out there and walk as long as you can because that really you need low intensity, lots of breathing to be able to pull out the stress. So this is the protocol for adrenal. In the next part, we're going to show you how to do acupressure on the adrenals. And then there's a last part, we'll show you some advanced things to do with the adrenal as well. But you're going to need someone else to do that on you.
Okay. So yes, he is selling some products and that's okay. The important things to remember here is that he's talking about diet. What can you do to help with these symptoms if you're having them? So your symptoms could be, I'm exhausted all the time. I can't sleep well. I can never fall into a nice deep sleep. That's another thing you can tell you're having adrenal fatigue. You're gaining weight and you might be eating the exact same things, the same number of calories, but you're gaining weight. You're maintaining this weight or you're even adding more weight, even though you're trying to lose weight. That's another signal that your adrenal glands are just a little bit too fatigued. So what do you do about that? Then you tackle it with, he said, exercise, diet, lots of different things you can do. And I'm sure he had some products that he could show you that would help you with that. But that's not what we're worried about. We're not worried about his products, but we're worried about helping you control your stress levels. Are you stressed out right now? Probably. If you're on the planet right now and you're over the age of 10, you probably have some levels of stress going on. So some of the things that he recommended are actually very simple, which is why I chose that video, even though it's a little bit promotional, is that B1 supplements and B12 supplements are huge as far as to helping this metabolism, this energy level in your body. Eating those good dark leafy green vegetables and the salads that he mentioned, huge. You don't have to go out and exercise for an hour and a half doing crazy aerobics or lots of cardio. A good brisk walk is going to really help you more than any of that. All right, last but not least, let's wrap up here with our friend. Yes, there we go. The tallest man, record 8 foot 11 inches, 8 feet 11 inches. Robert Wadlow. And these are, the typical size people that you'd find. These are his family members. And take a look at how long he lived. Not very long. Why do you think that is? Why is he holding a cane? Because when you're 8 feet 11 inches tall, that's right, almost 9 feet tall, right? And I don't know if he had gigantism or not, if he had acromegaly. I'm not quite sure. It looks like everything's proportional. So there were some other issues, maybe some growth hormone issues that were going on there in Mr. Wadlow, and he died because your body just simply can't keep up with that kind of need. All right, this has gone on long enough. It's time for you to go and write some things down and study for a little bit for your endocrine